Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Was it a work cruise or did the wife plan to meet someone special? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! Everything happened so quickly that I could hardly believe what she said. Honestly, I knew I was in big trouble when I saw them leaving the cruise ship arm in arm, but hearing it from her was unbearable. Maybe I should have ended things right then, but she was my life. I lived for her and loved her so much. When she calmly said she didn't regret her actions, it felt like a knife to the heart. If she had expressed remorse and never seen him again, perhaps things might have been different. Initially, my love for her led me to forgive her, even though she had been unfaithful. I never wanted to lose her. She was everything to me. When Millie said she wanted to leave with him, I understood what that meant. Despite what she said, I experienced anger like never before. Now, love seems like a thing of the past, though maybe not entirely, as I still loved her so deeply, but not as much as the pain she caused me. When she asked if she could leave with him again, she said all the wrong things. It was clear she didn't understand me well after all our years together if she thought I would be okay with what was happening. The situation worsened when I listened to the recordings of her phone conversations with Donna, discovering that everything had been planned. Donna had told Millie that I would be willing to accept her actions and that I would beg her to stay because of our 40 years of marriage. Donna had added that I would be too afraid to lose her. Maybe Donna was right, except she didn't understand the depth of my anger and need for revenge. I recalled my favorite Shakespearean character, who was deceived, and I vowed that this would not happen to me. As soon as we returned from the cruise, I began to put my plan into action. Millie's revelations only made things worse. I took detailed photos of them on deck and as they went their separate ways, including their goodbyes. I used my Nikon digital camera with a telephoto lens to ensure the quality and clarity of the photos. I also captured clear images of his cruise ID, which turned out to be a good move. Millie had refused to give me his full name, saying I should trust her that it wasn't important because she would never see him again. Her words echoed in my mind, and I suspected she was worried I might try to find him. I also took pictures of his friend with Donna, though I wasn't sure of their role at the time. If Millie thought I was cold and distant on the way home, she didn't yet know the extent of my frustration. I didn't want to lose her, but I wanted her to make the final decision. I considered confronting her when I discovered the planning, but I would have always wondered if she would remain faithful in the future. The rules changed the moment she asked if she could leave with them right after confessing. It reminded me of a line from an old Sherlock Holmes movie, Game On. When we got home, I said I was going to the basement to get a bottle of wine while we discussed what had happened and whether I could forgive her. God knows I wanted to, but then came a phone call. Did she think I was ready to accept her actions? While I was in the basement, I activated the phone and video cameras throughout the house to capture everything she said and to uncover the truth. It was clear she wasn't telling me everything, and her discomfort was evident. I was upset when Donna called, and Millie asked if she could go away with them in a few weeks for a long weekend. I felt my life was unraveling. Despite her promises to fix things, she blindsided me again. I couldn't understand how Millie could throw away 40 years of her life so easily. In a matter of minutes, she had completely destroyed me. I was furious and needed to get out of the house before I did something I would regret. Fortunately, I hadn't had too much to drink. I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door. On the way, I turned and said, "Millie, please don't do this. You said he didn't mean anything to you. You're an adult and responsible for your actions. You need to remember that I love you. I don't think I can ever forgive you if you leave with them again." Clearly, my words and feelings meant nothing to her. She had made her decision long before. I remembered her saying she didn't regret the affair. How could my words change her mind? I knew I had to give her a chance, so I drove around the city, growing angrier by the minute, and eventually stopped at a bar to avoid risking an accident. I hadn't been there for a long time, but as I entered, I saw an old acquaintance sitting alone. He was probably the most observant private detective in town. He took one look at my face and called me over, ordering a scotch for me. I was surprised he remembered my drink. It didn't take long for me to tell him what had happened. He asked what I intended to do, and I said I wanted all 4 of them to suffer for what they had done. I had no intention of being left behind or humiliated. He was good at his job and directed me by asking if I knew who they were. I told him that Millie was likely worried about what I would do and refused to tell me their full names, but I had some photographs. He leaned in and asked, "Do you want just a little pain or complete revenge?" My response was immediate, extreme. He smiled at my answer and asked what I had in mind, knowing it meant more work for him. He also had a personal disdain for unfaithful partners. I shared my thoughts with him, and he suggested I go home and meet with him the next day to further develop my ideas and discuss how to proceed. When I got home, Millie wasn't downstairs, so I went to the basement and listened to her recorded conversation with Donna. The recording confirmed my suspicions that everything had been planned. Millie admitted that things didn't go as planned, and she thought I had forgiven her when she called and asked about the weekend. She was worried that I might divorce her if things continued, but Donna reassured her that we had been married for 40 years and I wouldn't leave her. Donna even suggested that Millie could divorce me and take everything if things got difficult, and then marry Eric if she wanted. I could hear in Millie's voice that she wasn't entirely comfortable with this. She was there for the excitement and fun. Donna ended by saying that as long as Millie didn't deny me intimacy, I wouldn't complain. It was crucial, she said, that Millie spend the night with me to keep me from being upset. I wondered if Millie's promise of a night together was due to genuine love or just a desperate attempt to placate me. At this point, it didn't matter, the damage was done. I locked up all the recordings and went upstairs. Millie was waiting for me in bed, looking as beautiful as ever, despite her age. I asked her what she had decided. She replied timidly that they had already booked the chalet and it would be foolish to cancel. She promised that Eric meant nothing to her and that it would just be a weekend with friends. I found her excuses hard to believe after what I had heard. I told her, "Millie, I was willing to forgive you for what happened on the cruise, but if you go away with them again, our marriage might end." She quickly responded, "You have to learn to trust me, Ben. This will strengthen our marriage. You know you're the only man I love." I thought this was complete nonsense, but I had to say it out loud. Millie must have thought she could get away with it and that I was too scared to stop her. She beckoned me toward her, but I just crawled into bed, turned my back, and ignored her. Millie was shocked and should have taken the hint. Unfortunately, she stuck to her plan and sobbed quietly while I fell asleep. I had nightmares all night, and my love for her turned into disgust, at least for that night. We used to go to church every Sunday morning, but by the time Millie woke up, I was long gone. Personally, I now didn't care whether she went to church or not. I got up early to download and print the photos from the previous day and burn them onto a DVD. It was a bonus that their names were clearly visible. I also downloaded several apps onto her iPhone and activated them before hiding them. I would now receive copies of all her messages and call records. I initially considered turning off her phone but realized it was a valuable source of information that I needed to avoid being caught off guard. Besides, she could easily buy a prepaid cell phone if I did. My private investigator was punctual, and we went to his office together. As soon as we sat down, I handed him my photos and a copy of the phone record. He had programs on his PC that provided information not available online. Our two main subjects, Eric and his business partner Theo, had teenage children and worked together in Eric's father-in-law's company. Eric had married the boss's daughter. I found it amusing that they had told Donna and Millie they were single and even discussed getting married. They were clearly naive. We learned a lot about them in a couple of hours but needed more information to proceed effectively. We discussed the possibility of confronting them physically, which I thought was a great idea. He agreed to let me know when it would happen so I could have a reliable alibi with witnesses. It would be expensive, but his contacts guaranteed their work. I suggested it should happen after Labor Day weekend to ensure Millie kept her promise and stayed away from them. It could potentially save my marriage. I also needed to deal with Donna, who was complicit in the situation. I asked if he knew anyone who could set a building on fire for me, initially making the request sound like a joke to avoid appearing excessive. He looked around cautiously and then quietly said he had a friend on bail with a history of arson. He was experienced but had a criminal record. He would be in court next month for another arson charge and might need help paying for a lawyer. I asked if he could be trusted, and he assured me it was his brother, and with a few extra dollars, my name would remain confidential. We planned the operation meticulously. I provided Donna's cell number and a photo and suggested he buy a one-time prepaid cell phone for his brother. The plan was to have his brother send Donna a message on Labor Day morning around 10 a.m., asking her to be free at 11 p.m. that night and to let her know she could change her mind if needed. If she called back, he would claim it was a wrong number. After setting fire to Donna's work in her apartment, he would send another message confirming the job was done and arrange a meeting for settlement. We discussed the possible outcomes, including whether his brother might get caught and blame Donna or if he could negotiate a plea deal with the insurance company. His brother was confident he would be caught if he used the same method, but he could potentially negotiate a lesser sentence by blaming Donna. This could solve Donna's problem and possibly lead to her spending time in jail and facing financial ruin. We also had a plan for Eric and Theo, who lived in another city. My private investigator had a contact there who could keep an eye on them and alert us when needed. It was costly, but worth it for the revenge I sought. The irony was that I was paying for all of this with our shared savings, so if we ended up divorcing, she would indirectly help pay for evidence of her own actions. I was sure we didn't have much time. He called his friend, another private investigator, and sent him the photos, names, and information we had gathered. The investigator was familiar with them already and would keep track of their activities. It looked like everything was falling into place for the next phase of my plan. Tuesday night at the same bar in town, they considered themselves irresistible. We had a date set for Tuesday after the weekend, and I wanted to resolve things quickly. I listened carefully when their contract was confirmed over the phone with professionals from out of town. Details would be sent later. It seemed they were operating under the assumption that ignorance was bliss for me. I wasn't sure how much more my bank account could handle, but I told them I needed proof of their weekend at the chalet, photos, audio, video, anything I could use in the divorce. He said to install the surveillance equipment properly, he would need to rent the chalet for the middle of the week. I agreed, though he offered to accompany me on a holiday. I declined, finding the idea unappealing, but understood the cost would be higher. Still, I knew it would be worth it. Eric's second letter was devastating. It's one thing to know that your spouse of 4 years has cheated, but the letter included several digital photos. I planned to attach them to the divorce papers, sure that their wives would appreciate the evidence when they received it, probably on Thursday or Friday. We decided to include DVDs and photos from the weekend along with a letter from an STD clinic, notifying them that their partners might have transmitted an STD and advising them to get tested. I was surprised by how effectively this could be arranged, but I had learned that money could achieve much. At home, Millie continued to insist I trust her and that this would strengthen our relationship. Despite our interactions, there was no pleasure for me, only a longing for love and tenderness. Test results for STDs came back negative, but I knew my life would be in turmoil after the weekend. My private investigator enjoyed a brief respite but needed to stay longer to capture the information transmitted from the chalet and retrieve the cameras after they left. The long weekend arrived quickly. On Friday morning, I realized from Millie's phone conversations that she genuinely believed I would be eager to take her and Donna to the airport as instructed. She followed Donna's directions and expected me to assist with enthusiasm. I gave Millie one last chance to reconsider, asking her to change her mind. She said it was too late, everything was booked and paid for, and she needed me to trust her. She insisted it was something she had to do for us. How could she say that? If I hadn't read her letters and messages, maybe I would have believed her. Our marriage was on the brink of collapse. I shocked her by walking past and getting into my car. When I pressed the remote for the gate, she screamed for a ride. In my frustration and anger, I told her to go to hell and left, leaving her in tears. Returning to the dark and cold house, I felt a mix of disappointment and rage. Millie had left despite understanding my anger. Now, they would all pay. I went into the basement to listen to the recordings of her conversations with Donna. Millie had told Donna that I had sworn at her for the first time and then left, leaving her stranded. She worried the weekend might be a mistake, and Donna reassured her that I would be waiting at the airport on Monday evening, coming to my senses when I realized how much I missed her. I couldn't believe Millie could be so naive. I really didn't want to lose her and tried calling her cell phone, begging her to reconsider. The calls went to voicemail, and I knew I was probably too late to leave a message. Late at night, I was awakened by a call, hoping it was Millie wanting to return home. Instead, it was my private investigator, who reported that the party had begun and had already sent some photos and videos to my email as proof. I thanked him and knew I would visit my divorce lawyer first thing in the morning. Overwhelmed, I started crying. On Saturday morning, I sat down at the computer to settle all our shared credit cards. I had personal cards for work, so I wasn't concerned about them. I then transferred the remaining savings from our joint account to my personal account, which I had used for private purchases. I knew I was leaving Millie with nothing, which seemed fair given the circumstances. I felt conflicted but believed she had crossed the line first, provoking my reaction. The court would handle the division, and I could accept that. I was deeply affected by the photos of their weekend activities. Although I had a meeting with my lawyer, I struggled to look at the evidence. I gave him the photos from the night before to include with the divorce papers, ensuring Millie would see how her dishonesty was exposed. We had discussed only taking action if Millie cheated again, so the documents were prepared, and we just needed to serve them. I provided my lawyer with details of Millie's flight information, knowing she would likely contact me about her arrival time on Monday. I planned to ignore her message. I found it amusing how Donna thought I would eagerly take them to the airport, but I intended to be there, not to pick them up but to witness Millie's reaction to our marriage's end. I planned to change all the locks in the house and leave her belongings in trash bags on the porch. My private investigator would keep me informed about her lovers and any developments. We expected the situation to unfold in the hospital, likely on Thursday or Friday. My lawyer would be prepared if it involved any of his acquaintances. I wanted to ensure that Millie's actions had consequences, including for her associates. Saturday was difficult, and Sunday was no better until Vicky, our widowed neighbor, knocked on my door. She had seen me upset and came to check on me. I was honest about Millie's departure with 2 men and how I had begged her not to go. I showed her a revealing photo from Friday night, and Vicky, not offended, offered her support. She suggested that if I felt lonely, we could come to some arrangement. Vicky also invited me to dinner with her younger brother, a policeman, and his wife. I had met them before at her husband's funeral and got along well. I accepted the invitation, appreciating the distraction. As we enjoyed dinner in Vintage Port, a fire truck siren sounded, and I noticed a bright orange glow to the north. Realizing the fire was likely the result of the plan, I saw it as a perfect alibi. By Monday, I drove past the scene and saw the thorough job done, only smoldering ruins remained. Vicky had been concerned about me, so we spent the rest of the day walking in the park, discussing Millie's actions and the events of the weekend. I explained that Millie had shared details of her actions, and the private investigator had filled in the rest. We had dinner at a local restaurant, and I mentioned needing to take care of some business. She understood and, as I drove her home, she gently kissed my cheek, her intentions clear. She was very lonely, and time had passed. Her left hand touched my cheek, and she reminded me that she would be there for me. From our conversations, she knew I still cared deeply about Millie. I wanted to see Millie's reaction when she realized the impact of her actions. I dreaded the moment when she would be served with the divorce papers, but I was prepared. The only thing I feared more was seeing all the evidence of her infidelity. When my private investigator returned, he informed me that Millie had sent details of their arrival, but I chose not to respond. I arrived at the airport early and identified the person who would serve the divorce papers. He was dressed in a black suit and tie, constantly checking the arrivals board and his watch, while referring to a photograph in his hand. I saw Millie and noticed that she seemed to be enjoying herself. She laughed with Donna as they exited the security area, looking around for me. Donna had assured her that I would be there to greet her warmly, and Millie's face lit up, believing everything Donna had said. She thought everything would be better, having had the best of both worlds. As she raised her hand to wave at me, the server approached her and handed her the documents. Millie looked at the envelope, confused, and then opened it. It took a moment for her to comprehend that her life with me was over. She collapsed to the floor as people gathered around her. I stayed nearby, ensuring she was okay, but I wanted her to see me turn my back and walk away. Eventually, she was seated, drinking water provided by a caring airport employee. She reviewed the papers and saw the large photograph from Friday night, realizing that I knew about her weekend activities. The trust she had broken was clear to her. Millie cried as she called me, and I saw Donna looking for me among the crowd. I shook my head, turned my back, and walked away. Millie's pleas for forgiveness and declarations of love were heart-wrenching. Part of me that still cared wanted to collapse, but I continued walking, hoping she would understand the pain she had caused. As I left the building, I saw her crying, perhaps for the last time, and felt a small sense of satisfaction, knowing that Donna would soon find out the consequences of her actions. In the car, driving home, my phone rang persistently until I answered, having securely locked the house and closed the shutters. Millie's voice was filled with regret, and she offered all the typical excuses. She was sorry, she would never leave again, and her time with Eric and Theo meant nothing. It was all about improving our relationship, she said. Her predictable apologies and tears did nothing to sway me. She claimed she wanted to save our marriage and was ready to atone for her guilt. I was about to hang up, but I needed to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. I said, "For 3 weeks, Millie, I've been trying to tell you that leaving would change everything between us. I repeatedly begged you not to go, but you didn't listen. Now, you will face the consequences of your actions. God may forgive you, but I never will. I forgave you the first time, but you mistook my love for weakness. Not this time. There's nothing left to save. You destroyed everything we had, including our future together. You traded 40 wonderful years for a few days of betrayal. Remember, Millie, I didn't choose to lie and cheat." Before I hung up, I added, "Did you know that Eric and Theo are married with children?" Her anguished scream echoed as I ended the call. My phone continued to ring, but I knew I would answer it again. The house was dark except for the security lights when the taxi pulled up, and Millie got out, walking to the door. She struggled with her keys, realizing she was locked out, and began knocking and crying, begging for forgiveness. I was certain the neighbors could hear her pleas, but I didn't answer. I heard Donna call for her, and Millie got back into the taxi, likely hoping she could stay with her. I let the phone ring a few more minutes before answering, having checked the travel time in the morning. Donna was upset and swearing in the background. Millie was still crying, saying they had nowhere to go since Donna's apartment had been destroyed by the fire. When Millie asked if she and Donna could spend the night at our house, I just laughed and hung up. The taxi returned soon after, and they unloaded their bags. By then, I had turned off the security lights, leaving them in semi-darkness. After the taxi left, Millie noticed trash bags lined up on the street with her belongings. She knocked on the door and started crying loudly again. If she thought this was her only punishment, she was mistaken. Vicky, who had warned me about Millie's reaction, saw Millie crying and called to her through the fence. Vicky knew what had happened but evidently felt some sympathy. Millie explained to Vicky that she was away for the weekend with a friend and was now being kicked out. I overheard Vicky telling Millie that she and her friend could stay until Friday, but then her family would come over for the weekend. Millie and Donna thanked her and dragged their suitcases toward her house, relieved to have a place to stay. On Friday morning, Millie visited the clinic and was very upset to learn she had a serious condition. She disclosed her interactions with Eric and Theo and provided their full names and work addresses. I expected the letters to be sent to them on Tuesday morning, instructing them to get tested and begin treatment at a local clinic. The letters were indeed delivered as planned. Eric and Theo received theirs and, panicking, went to the clinic for confirmation and treatment. Millie, using my money, was about to start her vacation while dealing with her medications. I took a week off from work in case Millie and Donna tried to break into the house. Vicky informed me that Donna blamed me for burning down her job and apartment. Vicky defended me, explaining that I was with her all day Sunday. Millie became very quiet, realizing there was no forgiveness and noticing that Vicky had begun to show interest in me. Eric and Theo visited the clinic as soon as they could, anxious about how to inform their wives and verify their condition. By lunchtime, the letters for Millie and Donna had mistakenly been sent to my lawyer. It was incredible what money could accomplish. I suggested to Vicky that she redirect Millie and Donna's mail to her house for the week, as I wanted no further contact with them. The police would soon locate Donna when the arsonist complained. Wednesday was particularly hard for Millie and Donna. Vicky reported that they were shocked and distressed upon receiving letters demanding they visit a clinic. Without cars, they accepted Vicky's offer of a ride, with Millie planning to pay for the gas as thanks for her hospitality. I followed at a distance and saw Millie returning to the car in tears, followed by Donna paying Vicky. Vicky, being a great source of information, later told me Millie was stunned to find she had been cut off from money and credit cards and now had to rely on others. Despite this, Millie remained in denial, insisting to Vicky that I would take her back and she would find a way to make things right. I waited far enough away to get photos of Millie entering the clinic and even better ones of her coming out in tears. I felt somewhat better after receiving a call from my private investigator on Thursday. When I received a call from my private investigator, he said his brother had spoken with an insurance company investigator at the scene of the fire on Wednesday. He provided his cell phone number and said that if the company could come to an agreement, he would testify and reveal who hired him for the arson. He complained that he hadn't been paid as promised and was now being ignored. The company was eager to negotiate a deal if they could secure a conviction and avoid paying out on the insurance claim. In the end, his brother pleaded guilty to both arson charges and received a reduced sentence. His attorney fees were covered by the insurance company, and he still had the fee I gave him left over. He showed the police the text messages on his phone, and they arranged for him to come in for an identification parade once they located Donna and verified she had received the messages. They already had his signed statement and expected this to happen today, thanks to the redirected postal service. He asked if I had read the morning newspaper. When I inquired why, he told me about a story on the front page about two businessmen from a nearby town who were attacked, brutally beaten, and robbed late Tuesday night. Both men were hospitalized and expected to remain there for a long time. We discussed how tragic it is that walking safely at night has become so difficult. After that, I bought a newspaper and called Vicky to meet as soon as possible. I handed her the newspaper and briefly talked about karma, then asked her to leave it where Donna and Millie could find it. I told her that these two men were her boyfriends. She asked if I was involved, and I reminded her that she had coffee with me on Tuesday evening when it was supposed to happen, in a different city. I wasn't sure if she believed I had no involvement. Late on Thursday, my private investigator called again. His friend, another private investigator, told him that the hospital was in chaos. Eric and Theo both received summonses for their roles in the affair with my wife. The papers stated they were being sued, and at that very moment, their wives were handed manila envelopes. It wasn't surprising that Eric and Theo were in the same room. It made things easier for us. The informant reported that Eric's father-in-law was also present and had assured them that their jobs were secure and their health insurance would cover all expenses. However, once the envelopes were opened, shock turned to screaming and yelling from the wives. The photographs and the news that Eric and Theo had contracted an STD were too much. They were still employed while hospitalized, so health insurance would cover the costs. Eric's father invoked a moral clause in their contracts and fired them both. By mid-afternoon, both were summoned to their hospital beds again, this time for divorce proceedings. They were in a dire situation, especially Eric, who had signed a prenuptial agreement and was left with nothing but compensation. I found it amusing when Vicky later told me that Millie took the newspaper and started screaming. She and Donna ran out, scared that something terrible had happened. Millie, unable to speak, showed Donna the article about the two businessmen. They then looked out the window at me as I mowed the lawn. Donna suggested that perhaps I was responsible for this, considering my anger on Monday night when they were served the summons and the fire at my place. Vicky defended me, saying it was all a coincidence since I was with her at the time. Millie said nothing, her eyes filled with tears as she began to fear she had caused all this. Little did she know, there was more to come. A police car driving slowly down the street caught my attention, so I stopped the mower. The car stopped outside Vicky's house, and two policemen and one policewoman got out and walked to the door. I heard Donna scream and Millie cry again. I watched with satisfaction as Donna was handcuffed, placed in the back of a police car, and driven away. I knew she would be identified in a police parade and would not return home that night. I wondered if she would be able to make bail. She was beginning to face consequences for her role in my suffering, and I knew I would be there when she was sentenced. Just when Millie thought her life couldn't get any worse, Vicky reminded her that she would be evicted soon and needed to move out. The next morning, an hour passed before Millie could make the call without bursting into tears again. At least Vicky offered to let her keep all her belongings in her garage until she found somewhere to live. Millie now only had her friends from church. For now, she no longer had a family. On Friday morning, Vicky took Millie and several bags of clothes she needed to a friend's house from church. Vicky and I didn't see Millie until Donna's trial 2 months later. We were surprised to see Millie in court to watch her good friend being sentenced. It took us a few minutes to recognize her, as she had changed significantly during that time. She sat in an old, ill-fitting dress, looking unkempt and terrible. She had lost a lot of weight, her hair was a mess, and her gray roots were clearly visible. Vicky knew I felt guilty for the way I handled things. I had pinned a photo on the church notice board of Millie leaving the clinic and another of her with Eric and Theo, with the caption, "Can you trust this woman next to your husband?" Vicky learned that Millie had failed to change her behavior and had continued to blame me for our divorce. I did this to stop the abusive calls from her friends, which had stopped after I kicked her out. The calls ceased on Sunday, and I lost track of Millie when her friends at church, in a rather unchristian manner, refused to forgive her. I handed Vicky $500, which was all I had at that moment, and she took it to Millie, saying it was from me. Vicky spoke quietly to Millie for a few minutes until the judge entered the courtroom and then returned to me. Millie didn't see us sitting behind her, as we had come after her. She saw Vicky walk back to her seat next to me and noticed me looking at her. I nodded, and she lowered her head in shame. I knew she had finally learned her lesson and thought I had moved on. The arsonist was a reliable witness and convincingly testified, receiving only a short sentence thanks to a plea deal. Donna's defense had no counter to his compelling testimony, and she was found guilty. I saw Donna look at Millie as the judge read the verdict and then noticed me. I smiled and nodded, signaling my silent approval. Donna burst into tears, realizing that what was happening to her was my revenge for the destruction of my marriage. She began screaming that she was innocent and that she had been framed and was soon let out of the courtroom. She was fortunate to receive only a 5-year sentence. 2 months later, my divorce was finalized. I truly believed that Millie thought I was bluffing and was confident until the last moment that I would take her back. The court ordered me to pay Millie half of our savings at the time we filed the divorce papers, which was fine with me since most of our savings had been spent on retaliation. I even prepared money in an envelope to give to her through my lawyer before leaving court. The house was mine before I met and married Millie, so I still had it. Eric and Theo were still in rehab but agreed to an out-of-court settlement with me to avoid further costs and possible injury. They didn't know who had attacked them and didn't want to take any risks. Either way, they wouldn't be pursuing relationships with women anymore. We may have done a public service by removing 2 predators. By then, Vicky and I were seeing each other every night, and neither of us felt lonely. Our nights were full of affection and love, and Vicky practically moved in with me. Her family quickly accepted me as a new partner, and we acted like young lovers at times. Vicky was willing to accept that deep down I still loved Millie, but she knew that this feeling was fading every day. I knew that Vicky missed her husband and still loved him, but we were willing to deal with that as long as we had each other. Vicky ran every morning and would wake me up to see if I wanted to join her. I tried it once and told her she was trying to kill me. After that, I gave up running but always prepared breakfast for her return. One morning, about 3 months after my divorce, she didn't return from her run. I waited and waited while our breakfast cooled. When I heard several sirens break the silence and stop about a mile away, I knew something was terribly wrong since she was never late. I rushed to the car and drove frantically, knowing deep down that it could lead me to Vicky. A police officer stopped me. I saw an accident at the intersection ahead, with firefighters and paramedics working near a large van overturned on the sidewalk. I left my car there and handed the policeman the keys as I ran past him. He seemed to understand why I was running and looked away. I pushed my way through the crowd of onlookers and saw Vicky lying on the ground in front of me. She had been hit by a van and thrown. When the van overturned, Vicky was pinned underneath it. The other car was on the other side of the road. I saw blood everywhere and knew she was bleeding heavily. The medics said they were waiting for a mobile crane to lift the van. I looked at one of the medics working on her. She looked at me and just shook her head. I sank to the ground next to her and gently placed my hand under her head. I held her and said, "I love you, and I'm going to make you an honest woman." "Will you marry me, Vicky?" She must have known she was dying. With great difficulty, she replied, "Ben, that would be bigamy because my husband is waiting for me. I will be with him again soon." I cried as she whispered, "Please forgive me. I've been so selfish all these months, keeping you all to myself. I have to go. You have to promise that you'll find Millie and take care of her for me. She really loved you most of all and still loves you. She has no one, and I secretly met with her every week in the city and gave her money." She admitted to me that she finally realized she was wrong to listen to Donna. She regrets what she did and was full of remorse for how much you suffered. I replied, "Vicky, there is nothing to forgive. You have my promise. I love you." She smiled slightly and closed her eyes. When I kissed her lips, she stopped breathing. Although we were living as common-law spouses, I didn't challenge her will, and we never changed our wills. Her family was kind to me and included me in the celebration of her life. Through her family, I learned why she felt this way about Millie. She had done something similar to her husband many years ago, but they had overcome all the pain and resentment, and strangely, their marriage had grown stronger afterward. I took a leave of absence for family reasons and stayed home for several days. I missed Vicky and her laughter and felt a great emptiness in my heart. I thought about Millie, and I found myself driving through the city. I stopped at a traffic light and looked to the left, where I saw an old woman walking down the street. Her walk seemed familiar, and then I realized it was Millie. She had lost a lot of weight, her arms were covered with bruises, and her eyes were black. The sleeve of her old dress was torn, and people were avoiding her. The traffic light changed, and the car behind me honked its horn, so I drove on but turned left onto the next street and waited for her. I watched her approach, and she kept looking around as if afraid of being followed. I got out of the car and pretended to bump into her on the corner, catching her to stop her from falling as she was very weak. When she looked up and saw me, she burst into tears. The sparkle in her eyes had disappeared. She was dirty and unkempt. I doubted she had been at the women's shelter where she was supposed to be for several days. I helped her into the car. She resisted at first but was too weak to stop me from putting her in the passenger seat. Then I walked around and sat down in my seat. I turned and saw her looking at me. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes. I then said, "Did you know Vicky died?" She replied, "No," and burst into tears again. I suggested hot chocolate, knowing it was her favorite drink. She refused to go to the cafe with me, probably due to embarrassment. I went in alone and ordered hot chocolate and take-out cups, along with toasted ham, cheese, and tomato sandwiches, and hot fries, food she loved. When we arrived, she had already eaten everything. She was hungry. After finishing, she sat quietly for a few minutes, then I asked what had happened to her. She lowered her head and said, "I'm so sorry for the lies I told about you. I tricked everyone into calling you, hoping you'd feel guilty and take me back. But it backfired. I never thought you would do this to me. Even though I still love you, I know that we are finished now, and I deserve everything you've done. I regret attaching those photos in the church. I ruined your love and trust. I was so selfish and only thought about my pleasure, convincing myself that it would revive our relationship. Even after your warning, I remained silent. This is the remorse I wanted." She paused for a few moments, then continued, "Vicky was my only friend for a long time. I wondered why she hadn't come to see me in recent weeks and thought I'd lost her too. She helped me with money every week and gave me everything she could. I never thought that you would be so deeply hurt by what I did. I didn't understand until Vicky explained it to me. I thought you just wanted to get back at me for what I did by divorcing me. Vicky even mentioned how I had changed you and how difficult it was to live with you now. I was sad when she said she was with you, but to some extent, I was relieved that you had good company and were not alone without me. I often walked past our house in the evenings, hoping to see you again. Almost every time, I saw you both laughing and talking together, just like we used to. It should have been me with you. I still can't believe I hurt you that much. I loved you more than anything in the world and hurt you repeatedly without realizing it. It's no wonder you divorced me. When all my friends found out the truth about what I did, they refused to have anything to do with me. They told me I was selfish and foolish for my actions. It took me a while to realize that you were trying to stop me from making things worse. I am truly sorry for everything I've done." Millie began to talk about how terrible her life had become, how she had been robbed repeatedly, and how her divorce money had been stolen. She was kicked out of the shelter because of a fight and hadn't slept for days due to fear of being followed. We sat in silence for a while. I think she felt safe with me and eventually fell into a deep sleep. There was a part of me that still cared for her, and I took her home. I let her soak in the bath while I prepared dinner for us. When she came downstairs, she was in a towel, looking for me. She quietly said, "I just wanted to make sure you were still here," then went back to dry herself. Vicky's clothes were still too large for her, but they were the best I could offer at that moment. We finished eating and had to hurry for an appointment. She reluctantly accompanied me to the doctor's office. I realized that he went to the same church as her and might have seen pictures of her while examining and taking blood samples. He asked if we were back together, and I just shrugged. I wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't tell us anything we didn't already know and mentioned that the test results would be back in a week. Millie looked stunned and turned to me, complaining, "But Ben, I told you." I interrupted her, saying, "Millie, it's a matter of trust." She knew she had damaged my trust and lowered her head. I didn't know if she was taking her medications correctly, but I kept that to myself. I added, "I'll take the test too, since I was with Vicky." I saw tears in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. Millie fell silent, slowly realizing the gravity of what I had said. She seemed to hope that I would take her back unconditionally, but she now understood she had a long way to go. She remembered what Vicky had told her about my struggles and how I had changed. We went to her old hairdresser, who worked wonders on her hair, removing the gray. She began to look more like her old self. We then went to the mall to buy clothes. She only had Vicky's clothes left, and they didn't fit her. We didn't buy much, as I hoped Millie would gain weight once she started eating healthily again. Back home, we watched TV while I went down to the basement to get a bottle of wine and prepare dinner. I turned on the security cameras and chose a good red wine. I wanted to trust her again, but I knew it would be a long road. We sat on the couch watching a DVD, and she snuggled up to me, quietly crying. I didn't want her to suffer again. My revenge was complete, and I wanted her to stay, but I wasn't sure how to proceed. Perhaps we needed to rebuild our relationship from the beginning. I had another idea and said, "Millie, I need a housekeeper. I can't afford much after our divorce." I heard a sob when I mentioned the divorce. I continued, "Can we try to make things work again and see what happens?" She was silent for a while, then finally answered, "Where will I sleep?" I hadn't thought about it in advance, so I answered with a question, "Where do you want to sleep?" She must have already made up her mind and replied, "Hopefully with you, if you please." My concerns about trust and health remained, and I said, "How about a guest room until the test results come back for both of us? If they come back clear, we can reconsider the sleeping arrangements." She was beginning to realize how much I had changed, as Vicky had mentioned. She wondered if she could ever win back my trust or if it was a thing of the past. The first few weeks were very quiet as we began the long journey of rebuilding what we had lost. Millie woke up very early every day and made me breakfast before I left for work. She was still weak, but she seemed to grow stronger with each passing day as she cleaned and polished everything in the house. After the divorce, she had taken nothing with her, so she was happy to return to our home and enjoy the comfort of being together while watching TV. It was important to her, and I knew it meant a lot. Best of all, she was eating healthy again. When I got home each day, I would greet her with a hug before heading down to the basement. I was still obsessively checking things, unable to stop myself. We went back to the doctor for the test results, and I saw Millie's eyes light up when they told us we were clear. Millie was eager to get back into our bed and move the few clothes she had that fit from Vicky's back into her old closet. At first, she used one of Vicky's nightgowns, but I was still adjusting to everything. I realized that I couldn't engage with her in the way we used to, so I didn't. However, each morning I woke up to find her beside me, and her presence was soothing. I soon noticed that she didn't leave the house alone, even during the day. She said she was too ashamed because everyone knew what she had done, and many of her friends had seen the photos. I reflected on my actions and wondered if I regretted them. I knew that at the time. I felt I had to act to prevent them from winning. Despite everything, I compensated for what was lost. About a month after Millie returned home, we were sitting together watching TV, and I realized that my love for her had never truly disappeared. I hugged her tenderly, and she embraced me tightly, crying softly. I told her I missed her and our old life while she was away and questioned if things would ever be the same after what had happened. Millie cried more intensely and admitted that she had been hoping and praying for us to get back together and had never stopped loving me. I suggested that perhaps we should consider marriage counseling if we had any hope for meaningful reconciliation. She tried to kiss me, but I shook my head and turned away, realizing I was struggling with my own issues. I felt I needed help, perhaps more than she did. I was deeply troubled and decided to go to bed. The bedroom light was off, and as I lay in bed, I struggled with thoughts of her betrayal. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I was disturbed by nightmares. I felt bad for waking Millie, who said it was already 2 a.m. and that she had heard me shouting in my sleep. I got out of bed and went to the guest room, where I fell onto the bed. In the morning, I woke up next to Millie and remembered what had happened the night before. I realized I needed help to deal with my emotions and that my suggestion of counseling was necessary if we were to have a future together. I had trouble reconciling my feelings. I couldn't replicate the pleasure I had once felt with Millie after her betrayal. I didn't share with her that I was attending counseling twice a week, and she never questioned why I was coming home later than usual. The counselor eventually insisted that Millie attend the sessions as well, and we took turns discussing our experiences. During these sessions, I shared how I had recorded all her phone calls and knew about her deceptions in advance. I spoke openly about the pain I felt and how much I resented everyone involved in my misfortune. Millie was taken aback by how deeply I had been affected and the extent of my feelings towards her betrayal. I expressed hope that our love might make her realize what she had lost, but I came home one day to find the house empty. I saw all the pictures and watched the video of the woman I loved, behaving in ways I had never seen her before, doing things she had once said she couldn't. Those images stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. Finally, I looked at Millie and saw her in tears. She struggled to ask, "Did you see everything I did?" I replied, "Absolutely everything, Millie." There were cameras in every room of the chalet. Millie, visibly upset, responded, "Even when you were given the documents, I had hoped you had only seen the photographs. I prayed you would never find out what else I did, and thought you had just seen a few photos, but you have much worse, don't you?" I was afraid to speak, worried that I might break down, so I just nodded. The counselor looked up and asked, "You still seem bitter about everything that happened, Ben. Why did you invite her back into your life? At times, you still seem so unapologetic." I answered the only way I could. Her infidelity cost me my wife. How am I supposed to feel about it? Part of me never stopped loving her, but the other 3 people involved paid a huge price for what they did. But it wasn't enough, not really. We all suffered. Even Millie suffered. Our marriage was destroyed, and she lost her friends. On top of that, she endured her own kind of living hell for months. I want to trust her again, to love her fully, and to get to know this new version of Millie, but I need to be sure she'll never do something like this again. Maybe one day, who knows? The counselor continued, "But if you still loved her, why did you divorce Millie and make her suffer? Did you have anything to do with what happened to the others?" I wondered where he was going with that and stood up. "I divorced her because she betrayed me. She betrayed my trust, my love, and hurt me like no one else had. I warned her, and she left me no choice. How else could I show her how much I loved her if I did nothing and let them get away with it? I thought that if she believed what she was doing was right, how would she ever understand it was wrong? I'm done for today, doctor. Are you happy now? I'll be in the car waiting. Millie will be back next week, as scheduled." I added, "Oh, you asked if I was responsible for what happened to the others? Well, let's just say that by their actions, they were responsible for what happened to them. Maybe I knew this would happen and could have stopped it, but I chose not to, because I wanted them all to feel the same pain, or worse, that I was feeling." Millie just sat there, speechless, realizing that I had played a role in the downfall of the others because of the pain I was in. I walked out with the weight of my demons, which the counselor had just stirred up. He spent the next hour alone with Millie while I waited in the parking lot, knowing they could see me from the window. When Millie finally came out, she told me the counselor wanted to see me before we left, so out of curiosity, I went back inside alone. The counselor apologized for his earlier words, explaining that he already knew what I would say from our previous sessions, but he wanted Millie to hear it firsthand, so she could grasp the full impact of her actions and how much they had hurt me. He wanted to start helping her heal. We met with him weekly for several months, working through many issues. However, I still couldn't bring myself to kiss her, as memories of her betrayal lingered. We began taking long weekend trips to places where no one knew us. These trips helped make her more comfortable and got her out of the house. We always stopped at restaurants far from home, and as the days grew shorter, we started staying overnight in hotels. Millie began to regain weight, and some of the sparks she had before started to return, even though she was older now. Slowly, my anger faded, and we began to hug and hold each other as we had long ago. These small gestures of affection meant so much to both of us. One night, after we had shared an intimate moment, I kissed her tenderly on the cheek, and without thinking, kissed her on the lips. She immediately understood the significance of this and began to cry softly as we held each other in a warm embrace. One Sunday, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting to see Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists, as they were our only regular visitors trying to save our souls. I was always polite and spoke with them for a few minutes because they believed in their cause and meant no harm. Imagine my surprise when I opened the door to see friends from our past, before the divorce. We had met them through Millie's church and hit it off immediately back then, but I hadn't seen them since everything happened. Perhaps I could have kept our friendship, but I didn't, and as a result, I couldn't complain that they hadn't come to see me either. I invited them in, and we stood there for a few minutes, awkwardly trying to think of what to say before inviting them to sit in the living room. Millie and I made coffee, and I overheard them whispering. She felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave, but he wanted to restore our friendship. Eventually, we sat down and started reminiscing about old times, before they finally admitted that they had heard about our situation from church friends. We were living together again, and they had decided to stop by and see how we were doing. I noticed his wife seemed a little nervous before she finally asked directly if we were getting married again. Millie looked down, and I simply said, "No." Perhaps it was a little pushy on their part, but they went on to ask if we had any such plans. I surprised Millie by saying, "I've thought about it, but I don't know if she would want to, considering I still have a few hurdles to overcome." Millie's eyes widened, and she broke into a smile, throwing her arms around me and tearing up. The three of us took that as a yes. Our friends understood the significance of the moment and joined us in a small celebration. We talked for a long time, had a few drinks, and learned that they had wanted to see us when all the problems started but didn't know how to remain friends with both of us, so typical in these situations. That's why they hadn't seen either of us since. Since their visit led to the proposal, I asked him to be my best man, and his wife would be Millie's maid of honor. We called the priest at our old church, who was delighted to hear from us, and arranged a date for a quiet wedding. We were stunned when the entire congregation unexpectedly showed up on our wedding day, but luckily they all brought food to celebrate our second chance at love. It was a wonderful day, so I didn't bring up the hypocrisy of some who joined us. Counseling continued for both of us, and we finally began going out to local restaurants and clubs again after Millie accepted that people would never forget what had happened. Somehow, we always ended up around people who knew us from before the divorce. I saw them whispering quietly, glancing at us, likely wondering why we were getting back together after everything that had happened. If they had asked me, I would have told them what I finally realized. Donna was right when she said I would be lost without Millie. After 40 years of marriage, who wouldn't be? What she didn't account for was my anger and desire for revenge, driven by the demons that had been unleashed. Poor Vicky had no choice when she lost her husband. He died unexpectedly, leaving her to live the rest of her life alone. She had been doing just that until, fortunately for her, Millie made her mistake. I didn't think I could replace any of the women I had in my life, as I loved both. But I had a choice to make, and I didn't want to be alone at my age. Who would even be interested in me? Old Millie paid the price for her mistakes, and she was gone forever. But I got to know the new Millie, and when I felt I knew her well enough, I wanted her to be part of my life again, so I married her. She became much more attentive and tried to make me happy in any way she could. Of course, I still had my issues, but they seemed to be slowly fading as the demons my first wife had unleashed were gradually locked away again. Counseling had helped both of us tremendously. Millie had learned to live without some of the things she used to take for granted. Now, I feel I'm getting closer to overcoming that final emotional barrier. Perhaps as Christmas approaches, I'll make the effort to fully reconnect with my new wife, as I should. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, when the husband went out to meet his wife, he expected to see her happy, but not with a man he didn't know. What do you think of the story? Write in the comments. Until new videos.